During the occupation, there was 100% employment, which totally revitalized the economy, which is pretty neat. But also led to further conversations about independence, because they were like, well, now our economy's booming. We know we can do all of this stuff on our own. Do we really need Denmark? We don't really want Denmark.
We're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Kristen.
I'm Dr. Erin.
And you are very, very welcome back to our Colonizer's World Tour, Book 2, Chapter 1 on Global Women's Voices. We're in the third week of this chapter, and this week we are talking about Iceland.
Wow.
Unlike last week, where we knew many things.
A lot of things.
This week is about learning a lot of things.
So many things.
So many things. So, Dr. Erin, what are you bringing into knowledge on this one?
I mean, basically, in a lot of these scenarios, it's what I've learned from episodes of The Amazing Race. There are glaciers and before doing this research, I was like, hot springs? I know one of the Bachelors happened there.
Yes.
And I do know that they're known for kind of progressive politics in terms of environmentalism and representation of women in government and all those. So like bits and bobs, but the whats and the whys of Iceland, I knew very little. How about yourself?
Well, Mighty Ducks 2 gave us quite the education when they were playing against the Icelandic team in the Junior Goodwill Games. And the rhyme is that Greenland is full of ice and Iceland is very nice. And I have kept that in my head my whole life. Same as you, like some of the geopolitical stuff, like I knew they were decimated in the financial crash, but now they're the happiest country consistently in the world. I knew about the progressive politics. Lots of our friends have been there on vacation.
Yeah, because it's close to Ireland.
It's close to Ireland. And then even some of my American friends, I know they make really good vodka. Some stuff like that, but definitely not the ins and outs of the culture and what things looked like. And I was really excited to spend this time in Iceland. We also aspire to go there. So that was
someday.
Kind of fun. I was like, okay, cool. But we also learned that many people going to Iceland is a problem. And we'll get into that in a few minutes. So in the meantime, let's go to the map. Iceland, if you don't know, is an island, by Greenland, kind of in the Greenland Sea in the North Atlantic Ocean. It's why it's cold. It's very far north. It is a strategic location between Greenland and Europe. It's the westernmost European country. And Reykjavik is the northernmost capital in the world, which is a good Jeopardy fun fact, but is neither one of our fun facts. So we'll keep it going. There is more land covered by glaciers than anywhere else in continental Europe. And it was, in fact, occupied at one point by Denmark. And that's kind of where it enters into our colonizers conversation. Population-wise, we're at about 35,000. And a lot of that's urban because where else do you live? Pretty much nobody lives in the middle. It's just the middle is everything you've ever seen on a tourism billboard. The city is Reykjavik. Languages are Icelandic, English, Nordic languages, German. I learned from a YouTube video that they get the opportunity to take Spanish in school, and that the average Icelandic person speaks 3 to 4 languages, at least conversationally, if not proficiently and expertly, which puts them several ahead of me. Ethnically and indigenously, we got about 81 to 82% Icelandic. than Polish and Danish. And when any sort of level, this giant Polish population proportionately came in when they entered the European Union work agreement, where people from Iceland could work in the European Union, and then that meant that was a vice versa thing. Lots of folks from Eastern Europe came in to work in the construction industry, and before that, it was incredibly monoculture, monoethnic. And it's not even been 20 years since they really did that. And we'll get into that a little bit more about the ramifications of that decision kind of going on. Their currency is the krona. Currently 124 124 Icelandic krona go to $1. So have fun doing that conversion when you're in a shop. They are a republic, which is a unitary parliamentary republic. Cool. With 69 municipalities. Religion's really interesting. So they have the Evangelical Lutheran Church, just like every other Scandinavian and Nordic country. Lutheranism is kind of the thing. But increasingly, we have significantly more faiths. We have an increasing amount of no faith, people that identify entirely as atheist. But I had a really hard time finding things about the sociocultural religion, because if you've had a state church for this long, it's not just like, well, what does atheist actually mean? Are you still baptized in it? I had a really hard time finding information on that. So if you are Icelandic and you have data for me, I'd really love that, because I'm super curious now, especially knowing what I know about Denmark. Economy-wise, they are a capitalist structure with free market principles. They were deeply affected by the 2008 global crisis. Them and Ireland, actually, I think proportionally were the two worst affected. Although Greece was certainly up there. And they have diversifying into manufacturing in the last couple of years, but really what we need to talk about is tourism. And I'll let Dr. Aaron talk more about that in a little bit, because that's a part of a colonization, like a recolonization in a way, that we kind of need to have a little bit of a deal. So I will say that one of the things is that they privatized the banks in the early 2000s, and that was a real separation mark in their economic structure and how they kind of handled it. There's a lot to be said about the economy, so we're gonna return to it in a few minutes. Now that I'm done looking at the map, and demographics, they're median age is 37 and their life expectancy is 83, because these people are really healthy. They move all the time. They eat a super healthy diet with tiny proportions and a lot of natural foods, and they're doing okay. And human rights, they're not even listed on Human Rights Watch, which is something we've never seen before. So things seem to be going okay. But as we're going to get into with some of the demographics and some of the other, as Aaron and I talk a little bit more, increasingly we're having some real significant rise of alt-right movements and some racism that I think would not surprise me if in a couple years Iceland does end up on Human Rights Watch for some of the things that are happening with refugees and asylum seekers. So that's kind of my map and demographic spiel. Dr. Aaron, we're over to you.
You guys know it's time for colonization. And it's a fascinating story. I really enjoyed learning about why Iceland even was colonized in the first place, and how. So it was first settled by Norwegian and Celtic immigrants during the late 9th and 10th centuries. It has one of the world's oldest functioning legislative assemblies, called the Althing, or Althingi, which was established in 930, and it's this place where the chieftains used to come and meet and stand in a circle. And it's still the name for their assembly. It was really cool. They were too far away to kind of be involved in a lot of the European geopolitics of the Middle Ages. And so when the Vikings landed, then it became kind of a really homogenous culture that didn't change very much because it was too far away. And this is perhaps one of my favorite accidental colonization stories. The Vikings landed in Iceland by accident.
Love it.
Because they were trying to find the Faroe Islands. So if you look, on the map, you can see the Faroe Islands and Iceland are kind of out there. And so they had found the Faroe Islands and used them as a strategic point on their way to colonize and settle parts of the UK and Ireland. And there were some Vikings once that were like, we need to stop at the Faroe Islands, and they went a bit too far and ended up in Iceland, and they were like, whoa, what is this place? So we don't know a lot about the history of the early settlements, because the histories weren't written till long after, and we learned this a little bit when we talked about Ireland as well. The big success of the Viking Age was the establishment of settlements and the exchange of goods and culture, but the Viking histories weren't written until like centuries after. So the histories that we have are kind of more about oral tradition and storytelling. So we still see a really high level of affinity between Viking and Norse culture and Iceland because there weren't a lot of people there. And then it's isolated from the rest of Europe and the Americas. So fascinatingly, like the Icelandic language is Icelandic and Faroese, like the Faroe Islands language, are the two languages that have the closest affinity to like ancient Norse. And with a little bit of training, Icelandic people can read like ancient Norse, which is
wild.
Just really, it's just wild. It's really cool. The conversion to Christianity started in the 11th century because the Norwegians wanted to improve trade relations with the rest of Europe. And by 1380, we see that they become part of the Danish-led Kalmar Union. And they had lost almost total autonomy to the Danish monarchy by the 1520s. So, kind of a Viking colonization. And then once we get into like actual nation states and that sort of ethnic identity tied to a nation, especially monarchies at the time, it becomes, under the control of the Danes. And they were forcibly converted to Lutheranism by 1550. So, that pesky little Protestant Reformation sneaks in there.
Everyone.
And those Lutherans, man, they were real serious about it. And so, the same thing that happens with colonizers, the Danes were kind of like nice-ish colonizers, but they took advantage a lot economically. So by the 1780s, almost all of the Icelandic exports went to Denmark. And similarly to other kind of roads of independence we've seen, even this month, we've talked about India. We see just a rise in nationalism globally in the 19th century. It happened in India, happened in Ireland, happened in Iceland. But they were granted home rule relatively early, so 1874. But then there was this big old fallout from a volcanic eruption in 1875 that like totally devastated the Icelandic economy and caused famine. So again, like similar to Ireland, similar to India, we didn't do this on purpose, but apparently similar things happened.
Definitely didn't know there was a famine in Iceland until this week, so...
No,
you're welcome.
The 19th century. So over the next quarter of a century, 20% of Iceland's population immigrated, mostly moving to Canada and the United States. And then, again, the First World War has kind of changed people's perspective on colonization and autonomy. And after the First World War, Denmark was like, no, you're a real good strategic location, so we're going to make you a sovereign state within the Danish-Icelandic Act of Union in 1918. Again, Acts of Union. Very similar behaviors. It's almost like colonizers behave the same. And then... we love a good British and American occupation in the Second World War. So that happened in Iceland because, again, it's in this strategic position between the United States and Europe, close-ish to that part of Europe where Russia wasn't so far off. And the occupations were preventative occupations, which is always an interesting one where they're like, we're going to
that phrase. We're going to occupy you so no one else occupies you.
We're going to occupy you so Germany can't occupy you.
But we're the benevolent occupiers, so you're welcome.
Yeah. And it was really interesting because it had a great, actually very positive influence on Denmark. During the occupation, or Iceland, sorry. During the occupation, there was 100% employment, which totally revitalized the economy, which is pretty neat. But also led to further conversations about independence, because they were like, well, now our economy's booming. We know we can do all of this stuff on our own. Do we really need Denmark? We don't really want Denmark. So they had a referendum on secession in 1944, which passed the all thing by 97%. And thus we have the independence of Iceland. Obviously, they still have strong strategic ties, economic ties to Northern Europe, to Denmark, but also Canada and the United States because of that immigration that happened at the end of the 19th century. So a relatively, like, I didn't read a lot or hear a lot about kind of the violence of colonization. Yeah. I think it was more about strategy and economy, and especially because Iceland is too far away to have other people get involved in it. Although I did learn about the crazy cod wars between, not Cold Wars, cod is in the fish, between the UK and Iceland, which lasted from like 1958 to 1976. So you get it, but it was economic. It was about like fishing rights and you know, the controlling of the fishing lanes and fisheries around Iceland. But y'all, it's a fascinating place. Just, we've got a couple links on the cod wars down below, but it seems to me a fairly benign colonization. Again, Icelandic people, if you're watching this and you have stories that we did not access, please tell us. But you know, especially coming off of India and Ireland, this one was kind of like, meh.
And I think, though, so let's talk about the tourism, because I think this goes in there now. Because
Icelandic culture now is really, it's interesting.
Yeah, so let's essentially divide like post 2008, because I think as I'm reading, that's when stuff really, you know, even though they made these strategic European decisions in the early 2000s, we get the rebuild is when some of this stuff starts changing. So one of the big things is that Game of Thrones films all of its cold weather things in Iceland.
Filmed a lot of stuff in Iceland, yeah.
And if you don't know and you don't watch Game of Thrones, the Game of Thrones tourism industry was massive. It's obviously smaller now. But like the last probably 3 seasons and then 2 years after it ended, I'd say would be a peak based on the data we have from Northern Ireland, where is one of the other giant spikes in places. Yeah. So there's that. There's also like there were really cheap flights for a long time. Or not a long time, but in tourism, like a long time, like 2-3 years, right around the same time that all the influencers started being able to take those flights. So like everybody wanted to go to the Blue Lagoon. Everybody wanted to do all this kind of stuff. And we're reading that they're having significant problems before COVID with like, and no one will leave.
Yeah. So I'm just scrolling down in our notes, because I know I wrote some of this stuff down. From 2010 to 2017, the number of tourists visiting Iceland increased by 400%.
It's insane.
And we said it's a really low population for a nation, 355,000 people. So they were getting tourist numbers reaching 4.5 times the Icelandic population in 2016. And there was no infrastructure for that. There weren't roads. There weren't toilets at the Blue Lagoon. There weren't like hotels to accommodate that massive increase. I can't even like fathom the increase in that. And yeah, we've seen similar issues. You know, Dublin's housing crisis we talked a little bit about, but I don't think we talked about the use of, like, part of the housing crisis was the rise in Airbnb. We could do like a whole subsection on like the impact of Airbnb. But what happened in Dublin happened in Reykjavik and other kind of cities across Iceland, and that people who owned apartments or houses started renting them on Airbnb, kicked a lot of native Icelanders or native Dubliners out of their homes in order to make money off of renting them on Airbnb. So that happened in Iceland, and there's a great video where this guy is like, I don't think we should call it Iceland anymore. I think we should call it tourism land. Because he was getting like evicted out of his 4th apartment for Airbnb. And I was like, I don't disagree with your bitterness.
Yeah.
So that had a huge impact. But interestingly enough, like, they're one of the few countries that during the COVID increased their budget for infrastructure. So they took the COVID time and they were like, right, what are we going to do about this? So they passed a major infrastructure bill. And then they're also like having conversations about what tourism should look like and changing the philosophy. And instead of getting people on flyover visits on cheap airlines for like 2 days, can we get people to stay longer? Can we get them to go other places than just the really heavily populated ones or very popular ones, in order to still make money off of the tourism, but not collapse the entire infrastructure of a country?
Which is just a wild idea.
It was just, who knows where that came from?
So I find this to be, like, I learned so many Jeopardy fun facts that I don't want to limit it to one. But I know yours involved the Cod Wars. Is there anything else that you want to bring up?
Yeah, I mean, so many cool things. Yeah, the Cod Wars obviously would have been a good one. The whole island is geothermal.
Yeah.
Which is banana pants. But speaking of bananas, the one I went for was it is the northernmost banana producing country in the world. Because
of a greenhouse, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Okay.
Because of the geothermal energy, they can recreate a lot of different climates, especially warm climates. So yeah, indoor production and growth of bananas. They have Europe's largest indoor banana plantation in Iceland.
I love this.
I love Iceland. And
now wondering how many... I want to know how many Icelandic bananas I ate.
Right? I think they probably go to Europe. I think they don't come here.
I meant when we lived there.
Yeah, no, I know. Like, the next time I go to Ireland, I'm going to be like, do you have Icelandic bananas?
I'd like to taste an Icelandic banana.
I know.
Hi, video editor Eleanor here. I couldn't help but add my own Jeopardy fun fact to this week's 101. Mine is that there's a genealogical database called Icelandingbook that tracks ancestry data for the islanders. A few software engineers made an accompanying app which lets you bump 2 phones together and it'll look up how closely related you are. With such a small interconnected population, that really comes in handy when you match with someone on Tinder or meet a cutie at the coffee shop. The slogan is, bump in the app before you bump in bed. Better safe than accidentally snogging your second cousin, I guess.
How about yourself?
I have so many. They don't use last names.
It was such a good one. That was on my list too. I was like, okay, cool.
Mind-boggling. I watched this one video of an Icelandic person just comparing Iceland. It's the links in the show notes. Iceland to like the America she sees on television.
Nice.
So she was like, for instance, like we don't have trains here, and that wouldn't have occurred to me. Like, why do they have it? Like, why would they have a train system? So it's all just buses and cars.
Yeah.
And that makes total sense. The thing that I think I'm going to end up landing on is that they are proportionately the most published population in Europe. 1 in 10 Icelanders will publish a book in their lifetime. Their hobbies pretty much are reading, writing, kayaking, and hiking.
Yeah.
So in some ways, this is like my ideal place to live. Because
I mean, if you think about it, they're so far north that in the summertime, they have to be really active because they have like 20-hour days of sunlight.
Yeah.
But then in the winter, they have to have indoor hobbies because they have 20 hours of darkness.
Yeah, and then so you would think that for all of us that are, so affected by weather and they would have really high rates of depression, and they don't.
Yeah.
They have about proportional ones, and it's because they have a strong social cohesion.
Mm-hmm.
So like after the 2008 crisis, people were significantly less stressed than other places because they knew they'd be taken care of.
Yeah.
Which I find utterly fascinating.
Yeah.
And it's such a different approach to life than most of the rest of us live under.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And we should note that, as is happening around Europe, there is a rise in I should say not alt-right, but like right-wing kind of politics. And
it's
that
like
is
intense xenophobic nationalism, like intense,
and
monochromatic nationalism.
Iceland is not exempt from this. You know, they do not have a page on Human Rights Watch. They have, an excellent rate in terms of women's rights and suffrage. They had this, like, just Google home scrolling so I get it, the Women's Day Off general strike, which was in 1975. And basically they were like, we're not doing any more unpaid labor, so deuces. And men had to take over, like, everything. It was amazing. But they have this really great record, but they, like everywhere else that has experienced a rise in immigration, we have the Syrian refugee crisis and many other refugee crises from predominantly Muslim regions and the Middle East. And Iceland changed their policy to open the doors for more refugees, as a lot of other European countries did. But then we're seeing a backlash in that in terms of an Icelandic ethnic nationalism, increased rises in racism, and the idea that these people are going to have a negative impact on Icelandic culture. So we do have some links to some videos and articles about that as well. It's like the Icelandic National Front is the new right-wing party. So we're keeping an eye on that as well, lest you think it's all sunshine and roses and bananas in Iceland.
Yeah, and there's definitely some, we're hearing even some of the same phrases used, like dirty foreigners. Like it's a lot of, and we'll just remind everybody that a lot of these global movements are very connected because of the internet. And so it's not like it just so happens that they're using those words. I'm sure the woman that is interviewed in one of the videos that we watched has watched the woman from France and some of the people from the United States. And, there's kind of similar language. Yeah. So speaking of that, though, that plays a small element in the movie we are going to talk about tomorrow.
It does.
And the idea of exactly what is terrorism is kind of at the heart, and what is extremism is one of the things at the heart of the movie Woman at War that we are going to talk about tomorrow, a 2019 Icelandic. Okay, so they label it a comedy. That's not what I would label it at all. But
yeah, that was an interesting label.
Yeah, a 2019 film about climate change. That's actually the most interesting climate change movie I've ever watched.
That's
which
very
is
true.
Admittedly, a low bar because a lot of them are garbage. But a really, really fascinating set of discussions. And we have some differing opinions on this one. So unlike a lot of our coverage where we feel very similarly, we're going to have a little bit more of a conversation for this one, so you're not going to want to miss it. I think that's all I've got for now. Erin, you good?
I am good as gold.
Amazing. We hope that between now and when we see you again, you are warm and you are safe and doing things that make you happy, and maybe even eating a banana. Talk to you later.
Bye.